and welcome to this edition of Velocity Kinetics. So today what we're going to briefly discuss, excuse my squeaky chair, what we're going to briefly discuss is some changes that F1 are making to where the championship is completed. So it's going to become success penalties, if that makes sense. And we'll dive into that in more detail. I'm doing this between my working from home because some of the admin work that I was supposed to do I finished, so I'm just waiting to be assigned more. And what better way to kill time than to get another video out to you lot? If nothing else, it's something to put on in the background whilst you're doing things. So we will get onto that in just a second. So what is a success-based penalty system? Well, the name's in the title, really. What it means is the better you do, the more penalties you incur. Now, it's not going to be a case of, right, Lewis Hamilton, you won the last Grand Prix, you have a 10-second stop-go penalty at the start of the next one. Whilst in some ways that could potentially be a way round implementing the system, it's not really the best way to go about it. It's not quite that sort of penalty. We're not penalising the driver as such. We're just penalising the car. Touring cars used to have a weight-based championship, and I'm sure I've mentioned it before on this channel about potentially going to a weight-based championship. So the more successful you are, the heavier you become. I wish that was the case in real life because, well, I'd be a billionaire probably, or at least a multi-millionaire. Either way, better than doing a scroggy call center job. Anyway, what happens in touring cars is the more successful the car is, the more weight gets added to it. Likewise, WEC have added something similar to the Toyotas that kept dominating everything. They just turned up and won, so they put more weight into those cars to give the other cars a chance to catch up. Particularly when Volvo, I became very aware of this when Volvo were in World Touring cars. They were adding weight to the S60s because the S60s were winning quite a lot. But it's something British touring cars implement as well, which I think is personally a very fair way of going around things. It's the most simple way of going about things. It doesn't penalise the driver too much, and the car can still potentially keep winning. So how are F1 going to implement the penalties? Because in other forms of motorsport, it's quite simple. Now, like I said, in a touring car, you just put more ballast in a WEC car, you put more ballast in a Formula 1 car, there isn't really an awful lot of space for penalty ballast, not unless they start developing an extra section of the car to put the ballast in. But then you're gambling on the cars reacting the same to the ballast being put in. Some cars might suddenly become very oversteery, some might become very understeery, some might still remain nice and drivable, some might become absolute dogs. So it's not an easy thing to execute. How each form of motorsport goes about it is one that they'll have gone through and tried and tested. Formula 1 is going to be very much trying and testing as it goes. Now, one thing someone did suggest, now when I say someone, I wish it was through our Facebook pages and through some lively discussion, but I'm sure someone suggested it through an Ask Elvis when I was watching one of Mark Priestley's videos. Why not do a downforce penalty? So you're more successful, right? Well, give your car more drag. And in some ways, that's not a bad idea. The only problem is the car might become very unsettled. And then how do you stop them putting, for instance, when you change your tyres, you might need to put some more front wing on or take some more off. How do you stop them removing the penalty of the front wing, if that makes sense? Or if it starts raining, and then at what point do you put more wing on, and so on and so forth? The theory behind a downforce penalty is brilliant. The execution is an absolute nightmare. So what else could you potentially do? Well, the other way you could potentially do it is, as we mentioned, weight. Another one could be power. So you could maybe restrict how much of the horsepower is available. So if they've got 1,000 horsepower available, you make it so only 900 is available. But again, you end up in an odd situation because it depends on where in the torque band all the power comes in. So say, for instance, I don't know how this works between all the different engine manufacturers in F1. Some might have this very straightforward. Some it might not be so. But for instance, Honda engines, if their F1 engine is anything like their road-going engines, particularly the Type R road-going engines. Honda's power is mostly at the top end of the range. That's when you get the most get up and go. That's also kind of where a turbo is really working at its best. But for instance, if you look back at the Renaults with during Alonso's stint, granted they had the mass dampers to help them off the line, but the Renault always was a better engine to get off the line. Even after mass dampers and Alonso's success, going into the 2009-10s, the Renault engines were better off the line. To the talks at the lower end. Mercedes and Ferrari are better throughout, are more, I wouldn't say better throughout the whole range, but they can compensate better throughout the whole range. And then when you get to tracks that are affected by altitude, they're already losing power. Then you might turn what might be a normal, fairly sensible penalty into a car into sitting duck. And then it's how do you do it? Do you restrict the amount of movement they get in the cylinder? Do you restrict the amount of DRS? Do you just make it so they can't have DRS? But then if, for instance, if you go down the route of, well, you can't have DRS. Okay, so Hamilton puts it on pole and stays in front. Well, he's not going to miss not having his DRS. He's going to have to work a little harder getting by the back markers, but that is it. It's not the end of the world. The other ways to go about penalising the team would be to make them start on different tyres, so make them have the worst tyres. But again, the car setup might become a bit dangerous. It's how do you implement it in such a way in a sport like F1? How can you implement a success penalty? So the way Formula One are going to go about the success-based penalty, not quite in the way I would do it. Now the way I would do it is I would hit the wallet. Now they are hitting the wallet a little bit by evening out the championship payments, but I would say those who did the worst get the biggest payment. Quite simple really. So for instance, with Williams doing badly, then it's a case of, they need all the help they can get. Bang, give them as much money. Mercedes managed to do what they could, managed to win. Then they don't need as big of a handout from the World Championship. That should then in theory mean that you might get periods of dominance, but rather than talking 4, 5, 6 years of dominance, you might get 2, maybe 3 years of dominance before the knock-on effect of the smaller budget happens, unless they have got a massive backing from somewhere else, like PDVSA for Williams when they had Maldonado, or Mercedes with the road cars, or Ferrari with the road cars. But in saying that as well, with the budget cap coming in, this should obviously help plug the holes and even things out, because teams like Ferrari and Mercedes have ways of getting their own budget without anything like that. The way they're going about it is they're restricting resources. So what this basically means is, if the team does well, they get less things like less CFD time, less wind tunnel time. Now, whilst that might not add up to an awful lot initially, I'm sure from Ted's notebook I was watching, I think it's initially going to be differences on like 6 or 7 hours a week. That's different, and then by the end of the second year of them doing it, it'll be more like 9 hours a week. That's different. If you think about it, that starts to stack up as to how much more extra time they're allowed, whether that's another full day effectively, which it is, or allowing them to run later into the evenings. But it is a way of restricting. This does mean that teams could be forced to find other ways to get the same advantages. So for instance, if Mercedes have their wind tunnel time cut down by 20 hours, for example, they might find another way to do the same simulations without using a wind tunnel and without using CFD. Quite how they would do it, I don't know, unless they do something weird with almost like hydrodynamics, but not quite how that would equate to aero is another thing altogether. What does this mean going forwards? Well, coupled to the budget cap, it'll mean that teams can level the playing field a bit. It will hurt teams who don't have their own facilities, which is why they're spending a lot of money at the moment and getting their stuff together. So by this, what I mean is the likes of Aston Point, Racing Martin, they're spending a lot of money building their own wind tunnel, because at the moment they don't have a wind tunnel. They have to use Toyota's one in Cologne. And likewise, Haas don't have a wind tunnel. But teams like Williams, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, even Toro Rosso and Alfa have their own wind tunnels. So those smaller teams without those facilities will be hurt. It also is a detracting factor for potentially getting new teams onto the grid. The new teams would be unlikely to have those facilities unless you're getting someone with the backing of Porsche or somehow some sort of Renault junior team, so whether they're coming in branded as Gordini, for example. So unless there's some sort of resource sharing going on, they won't have that facility. But teams like Williams, etc., could also potentially use it as a revenue stream by saying, okay, well, you can come use our wind tunnel, but you're going to need to pay. So it swings and roundabouts all the way around. Is it something Formula One should be doing? Some people said absolutely not. The best car should be the best. I'm not sure, to be honest, because Formula One hasn't done anything like this before. It's a new way to go, and if you don't want to go to spec parts, this is the next best thing. Spec parts have their pros, they have their cons, but ultimately, it's the next best thing. It'll help, let's say, even out the playing field. Not with the budget cap already doing this. That should even things out quite a lot anyway. If you can restrict the amount of time people can spend doing things, then that's the best way to do it. Now, if you've got someone like Adrian Newey, whose brain just happens to work like a wind tunnel, so he can just see it working, then you know you've got you're in luck. You've got someone who can just do it for you without having to restrict the resources, and you can't exactly turn the brain off. It's going to mean teams are going to need to sign bigger and better brains, but Formula One's the brain capital of the world, in my opinion, or one of the brain capitals. So you shouldn't really be having anyone who's subpar in the sport anyway. As to what it means for Formula One itself, it shows that Formula One's willing to change. It shows it's willing to adapt. It shows a lot of very positive changes. I would like to think that if the likes, well, I think HRT would have always failed anyway, and USF1, who knows if that, there's always rumours that that's going to kick off again, but I'm not sure that will. But the two most successful, the most recent new teams, as in the ones that stayed longest, are Caterham and Marussia, Virgin, whatever you want to call them. If they were coming in under the current regulations, they would. I can't say whether they would have survived or not, because ultimately a lot of that comes down to operational efficiency. So if they weren't run very efficiently, then they aren't going to stay. But I think it would have made them a lot easier for them to stay. They wouldn't have left. They wouldn't have potentially gone bust. They might have found it more easy to have someone else take over the team, so they could have potentially put the team up for sale. And F1 really has to think this all through, because they've not only got to keep the existing people in the sport, they've got to get new people in. They've also got to get more money into the sport. And how do you get more money? Through sponsors, through even simply just by saving money. Whilst that is not technically, well, I'm not a businessman myself, so I don't know whether it be classed as profit, but money not spent, in my eyes or my limited business understanding, if you've got capital you haven't used, you can't call that profit. But F1 can remain a lot more sustainable. It gives F1 a better chance of staying. Trying to think how the best way to put it. F1 can stay, or at least try and get to the team's break even. I know F1's not a profit-leading business, so if you're a racing team, you hardly ever run at a profit. If you run at a profit, then usually something's gone very wrong. Whether that means you've done some creative accounting, as in not added up properly, or it's a false impression because you've had a large investment, if that makes sense. So Williams could post 100 million profit, but all because they signed Rocket, or because that happened with Williams when they signed PDVSA. They had a huge profit, but because PDVSA had put a large amount of money into the team. So who knows whether this is going to be the right thing. I'd love to hear your opinions on it all. It's very open for debate. I think it's a very good, very progressive, very right method for Formula One to be following. And even if it doesn't work, so even if it proves that it is unenforceable, or unattainable, or it's just too heavily flawed. We have tried, and I think this is where F1 falls flat on its face constantly. It either won't try something, or it hesitates for far too long before trying something. Liberty and with the likes of Ross Brawn should help counter this mentality. But we need to try it to know if it's not going to work. And if you couple in something like reverse grids, people say, oh, it's not going to work, it's not going to work. Well, actually, until we do it, we don't know if it's going to work. Remember the elimination qualifying fuck-on that we had a few years ago? They've quickly reverted back to the old format. But guess what? They had to try it to see if it wouldn't work. So, who knows? Like I said, I want to hear your opinions. Please remember to keep donating to the page paypal.me/velocitykinetics. I'm a bit of a loss as to what footage and videos I'm doing next, not because I've run out of ideas, because remember I posted a few weeks ago about my PC killing itself. I'm still finding bits of video that I can't work out if it's rendered, what the idea of the rest of the video was, because some of the other documents and other videos that went along with it died on the hard drive that completely snuffed it, and I can't get the hard drive to fire back up to get the information off. So we'll see what footage I can get out. I apologise if there's any duplication in material, even if it's only up briefly duplicated. I am, like I say, working through it. We'll see what happens. But look after yourselves. Don't break the quarantine rules. Follow them as fully as you can, and look after yourselves. We will see you in the next edition. Oh, and also, just something else I want to mention. Don't drive like a muppet with the releasing of lockdown. The number of people that are out and about at the moment driving like absolute muppets is, I can't wrap my head around it. I appreciate it's the first time that you've been able to get out, and you might feel a little rusty if you've not even set foot in a car for a few months. But please just think about it. # everyone wants to get home. Thank you.